Well, joining us live now is Bradley Bowman, Senior Director of the Center on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Bradley, good to see you. What could these second sanctions be? What could they do?
Yeah, no, the big idea here is that we've seen kind of this cycle of Putin provocations followed by laments from good faith laments by President Trump that he wants the war to come to an end. He wants to see an end to the humanitarian suffering. President Trump, issues warnings. Putin shrugs, blows it off, and continues his attacks. I mean, these attacks we just saw over the weekend were the largest combined drone and missile attacks we've seen since Putin's massive reinvasion in February 2022. So what I think we can confidently say is the current mixture of policies is not working. And Putin is unimpressed and unafraid of warnings emanating from Washington. And so what could additional pressure look like? Well, it could be not only more rigorous sanctions against Russia, but more importantly, or just as importantly, is secondary sanctions focused on Russia's oil revenue. Of course, Russia's oil exports are one of the primary ways Putin has been funding this unprovoked war of aggression. And it's primarily purchases of Russian oil from China and India. And of course, we saw the significant tariffs posed against India, but there's been a reluctance to impose those secondary sanctions on China. And it's my prediction that until we apply more secondary sanctions pressure focused on Russia's oil revenue, we're not going to see Putin negotiate in good faith, and that has to be along with other steps in the military domain as well that I could discuss.
Yeah, and as we mentioned, Moscow has already said the sanctions have no effect whatsoever and are absolutely useless. So do tell us more about the potential military steps then that the US and its European allies could be considering here.
Right, no, for sure. So we have this deal that Trump arranged with Europeans where it's European money purchasing American weapons delivered to Ukraine. You know, that's a positive program, but we have to make sure that program is being used not just for air and missile defense, but for also offensive capabilities, including air launch and ground launch precision guided munitions. But we also have to say that, the Trump administration has essentially stopped U.S. funded weapons. And that's unfortunate because in addition to the European money, I think America can afford this. If you look at the end of September of last year, in the $66 billion or so in security assistance on the Biden administration, that was the equivalent to less than 2.8% of what Americans spent on the Pentagon over the same time period. So I think appropriating additional Ukraine security assistance initiative funding, presidential drawdown authority funding would add that American money to the European money and allow for the quicker delivery and of increased weapons, both offensive and defensive. And those things combined can begin to start to shift Vladimir Putin's cost-benefit calculus.
But this money can only be spent for so long, even if it's combined with European money. And there is already, of course, a movement in America that's keen that the US does not continue its involvement in international conflicts. If sanctions are becoming tiring, eventually the spending becomes tiring. Surely all President Putin has to do is play the long game.
I do think he thinks time is on his side, and I think he looks at Washington and he sees lots of warnings and less action, and he's reading the political moment, and he's also engaging in an offensive information warfare campaign where he's trying to distract Americans and make us as dysfunctional as possible and deceive us about our interests in Ukraine. Americans know that 2 world wars started in Europe and within a 30-year period. We ultimately were brought into both, and more than 500,000 Americans ultimately paid the ultimate sacrifice. And so what happens in Europe matters to Americans, and it also affects calculations elsewhere. If the United States is not willing to simply provide Ukraine the means of self-defense, why would Beijing believe we're going to send thousands of Americans to fight and die in the Taiwan Strait, thereby making Beijing aggression more likely? So what happens in Kyiv won't stay in Kyiv. And I think we need a little bit more leadership from Washington explaining why we should care about the outcome in Ukraine.
Okay. Bradley Bowman from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Bradley, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.